Hey, great tense. So we are now entering the last unit. So this is great. We are near the end now. So we're looking at financial math, which is personally, I'll be honest, is my favorite unit. I think this is the type of math that everyone needs to know. So I am personally very invested in this topic. I'll say that for sure, because I think it's something that everyone needs to have a good understanding of. So whether you like it or not, we will all use financial math in some point in our lives. So I think it's really important to go over this. So in today's lesson, we're just going to start off easy. We're going to look at simple interest. So what we're going to learn about is the concept of interest, what is interest, and then looking at simple interest and how to relate simple interest to linear growth. So when do you use this? So I'm not going to go over this in as much detail. This is more for you. I'm sure you can think of lots and lots and lots of examples of when you use financial math. So you're opening up a bank account. You want to figure out how much money you have. That's financial math. You're dealing with credit cards. So I'm not sure how many of you actually have credit cards or not. But if you've ever looked into getting a credit card, you can see that it's actually a very high interest rate if you do not pay it on time. Now, normally, this is a good thing, credit cards normally don't charge you right away for late payments. They normally have a grace period, which is about roughly sometimes about a month or so. And they don't charge you for the interest right away. But if you go past that time, they will start charging you. And it accumulates quite quickly. So it is really important that you do know how credit cards work before you actually get a credit card. I think one of the big flaws is a lot of people will get a credit card thinking like, oh, sweet, I have extra money. That's just, for me to spend. But really, you have to remember that whatever amount that you get, you owe back to the bank, right? It's actually it's borrowed money, right? So you have to pay that back on top of the interest that you are getting charged for, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about what interest is. So it's quite high, 20%, 30%. We'll kind of look at some examples of that. Even if you wait a couple of days, it actually makes quite a bit of a difference, right? So on top of paying back your initial amount that you borrowed, you're paying back an additional fee for basically borrowing money from the bank. If you're looking to save money, let's say that you're saving for a trip, although no one can go on a trip right now. But let's say you want to save some money for university, college, or something fun, maybe a new computer or I don't know, a video game, whatever it might be. This is a great way to learn. This is also going to be really important for you as well. You want to know how do you actually reach that goal? How do you save money? And again, we won't get into the practicality of that. I wish we had more time to go over this, but just a couple of different topics of when there's a couple different applications of it. We're going to be looking at buying a car, buying appliances, buying anything by financing. How does that work? We are going to look into buying a house. We may not get into the rentals. That's something a little bit different. It's not as complex, but you again would have to save money for renting as well, right? And I'm not sure if anyone's aware of this, but when you rent, you normally have to make first and last pay on the first before you actually rent. So that's also something to consider as well, right? You want to make sure that you have enough money saved up for that. And if you're ever trying to figure out, which deal is better, this is when you're going to use financial math as well. So what is interest? So interest is basically the amount that is paid for borrowing money or the amount that is earned for lending money. So you can be on one side or the other of this experience. So you can either be the person that's borrowing money, which means that you are losing money, or you could be the person that lends money to someone, and that means you're gaining money. And actually, I'm not sure, and I don't want to go into the whole logistics of how banks work, but that's essentially how banks will work. The reason banks actually pay you interest, and interest is basically money that is paid, kind of like almost think of it like thank you money, right? Like it's like a little bit of gratitude money that's given to you for lending the money. So that's basically the reason why banks pay you money is because when you invest in their bank, they are then able to take your money and actually um, in different enterprises, invest in different things to increase the total amount for the bank. So really, by you putting money in there, you're really helping them. But in return, they give you interest money as well, which is kind of like a way to show gratitude, almost, right? So interest is paid either, like I said, it's either paid if you borrow money, or it's something that you are actually receiving if you're investing money in a bank. Then there's another a fancy word that we'll talk about a couple times. So I want to make sure you know what this means. Financing. So financing is the process of providing funds. So you either provide funds or money to a loaner. And actually, a better word for this is a loanee. Sorry, lendee. I should probably change that. It's actually not loaner. It's you're providing money to the person who is getting money. Um, so an example of financing would be, you're purchasing a vehicle as an example, and you normally, let's say, okay, I'm just giving an example here. I bought a car at Nissan, right? So I go to Nissan and I say, hey, I want this car. But let's say, I'm just making this up. Let's say it's like $30,000. I may not have $30,000 offhand, right? So what I'll do is I'll say, you know what, can I finance this? And that basically means that that institution there can lend you money so that you can buy their product. Now, it's not free, right? Like I have to pay that $30,000 back, plus I have to pay them more because they did me the favor of lending me the money when I didn't have it. So this is actually very common when you're purchasing a vehicle, even things like buying furniture, appliances, or more expensive products. This is a very common scenario that you might be in. So again, financing, really important that you actually know what that means, and we'll see a couple examples of that. Um, just a small little note. I always like to just bring this up. I'm sure you've seen this in the downtown maybe, or just different places. You'll see signs for easy cash loans, or get instant money now. Those you really got to be careful with. Basically, what that happens with that is they give you money um, off the spot, and it sounds like an amazing deal, right? Like they'll give you $200 on the spot, but again, you owe that money to them, and they'll start charging you interest quite quickly. So there's normally a bit of a grace period, but the interest rates can be quite high. Again, it depends on the interest rate. If the interest rate is relatively low, like maybe less than 1%, it might not be that bad. But if we're talking about interest rates that are as high as like 5, 10, 20%, that's really, really steep. And you don't want to be, and again, if you are going to use that money, you want to be able to pay it back as soon as possible, right? That's your goal there. So a big question, and I always answer this question to students because it's a great question here. Why do you even borrow money in the first place? So a big question is, like, can't you just, you know, raise your own money and then not have to worry about dealing with interest and paying someone back? Well, in the ideal world, ideally you would have enough money that you could sustain yourself for whatever you need to do. But there's actually going to be a lot of times for in anyone's situation where you don't actually have all the money and the resources to pay for that expense, whatever it might be. So let's say that you want to open up a business, and you want to make sure that you have a brick and mortar shop. So you actually need a location, maybe in somewhere in the city. You may not have, again, you may not have all the money or the funds at hand. So what you do is you go to the bank and you ask them, hey, listen, can you give me a line of credit to assist me with this? Or can you give me some sort of loan? Um, Another scenario when you might use, and this is a very common scenario, when you're purchasing a home. I'm not sure if any of you have heard this, but the average home right now in London, if I am not mistaken, last time I checked, was over $600,000, which is pretty crazy, right? It's insane that it's actually that much. It was never that much before. The average house price used to be at one point, even recently, was like in the 300,000 area. And now we're looking at houses that are more than $600,000 in London. That's not to mention Toronto, which is even more expensive. So houses are expensive, right? You're gonna buy a house of at least $600,000, or maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more. Most people don't have $600,000 just lying around, right? That's a lot of money to just have available. So this is where you get something called a mortgage. And so I'll talk a little bit about what a mortgage is. This is something we're going to discuss in the last lesson, okay? And another reason you might want to also have a credit card, or even consider financing, is because you want to build up a good credit score. So a credit score is basically kind of a rating or a ranking that people receive. It basically tells you how responsible you are as a lendee, like how responsible you are repaying loans. And you don't actually get a credit score until you actually start showing that you have a record of paying off um, different loans quickly, right? So for example, if you get a credit card and then you're able to pay it off within that time every single month, that raises your credit score, and that means that you're actually a more responsible person. Ideally, you want your credit score to be quite high. And again, the reason for that is because if your credit score is high, you can then eventually apply for a mortgage loan, right? So a mortgage, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on, it's not a guarantee. You have to apply for a mortgage loan, right? And the banks may refuse you if they look at your credit score and they say, you know what, you don't seem like you're that responsible of a lending, right? You don't seem like that responsible a person to pay back the loan. So they might not give that to you, right? So you want ideally to have a credit card, purchase different products using financing. But here's the key thing. Don't do that if you can't pay it on time. If you're not paying it on time, then you're not really doing yourself a service, right? But what you're aiming for is to you get credit cards, you purchase different products. Maybe you buy a car and you pay it off within the time limit or even before that. That all helps you with your credit score, right? And again, if you're paying off all your credit cards on time, then this helps your credit score. So it is really important. I know you're quite young to already be thinking about this, but it's a good idea to start thinking about your credit score. Obviously, you don't have one right now because you don't have any big purchases. But once you're living on your own, you definitely want to start thinking about, hey, maybe I should get a credit card, and maybe I should try to build up my credit score so that maybe down the line, down the road, you can get a house, or you can, I don't know, buy a cottage or buy a boat or buy whatever you want to buy, right? And this credit score, I know it seems really simple, but even for things like buying appliances, I've seen scenarios where you go you go to buy furniture. Like I just recently bought a new house. We're looking into buying some furniture, buying appliances. You go in there. That's one of the first things they ask is about your credit score. They will do the scan on that, right? So you want to make sure that you have that built up in some way, right? Again, you have lots and lots of time, so don't stress about this. But just kind of want to let you know this is why you need to. This is why there's going to be scenarios where you're going to have to borrow money, right? You will obviously try your best to not do it as much. You definitely don't want to fall in the trap of having so many credit cards, but you should ideally have maybe at least one, right? And then, of course, be responsible with paying off that credit card. That's the most important thing. So just hear my advice correctly. I don't want to steer anyone the wrong way. What I'm saying is definitely it's good to have a credit card, but make sure you pay it off as soon as you can, right? You never want those payments to accrue. So we'll first talk about, sorry, I apologize, I get a little off topic. Like I said, for me, I find it a really interesting topic. So if I get off topic, you can definitely skip over my video, okay? So simple interest, I'll just talk about the difference between simple interest and compound interest. Simple interest is the interest that's calculated on the original balance or the principal of an account. So what I mean by original balance is basically how much money you have in the account. So money in account, okay? So a simple interest is based off of how much did you put in the account at the beginning, right? So original meaning at the very beginning, how much money did he put? Simple interest is going to pay you the same amount every single year, and that's the important thing because the amount that you put into the account is the same, and it never changes regardless of how much it increases by. The simple interest you earn is actually going to be the same throughout. However, by comparison, compound interest is a little different. Compound interest is actually calculated on your original balance plus the interest that is earned on the plus the interest that is earned through that investment. So it's actually kind of two parts. We calculate the interest on the original balance plus you have to calculate interest, the interest that's earned the interest that was earned as well, right? You have to calculate that as well. So it actually accrues a lot faster than simple interest. And we will look at some examples of that. I don't want to, like I said, compound interest, we will definitely talk about it more in the next lesson. But for now, I just want you to understand what simple interest is, right? Simple interest is just calculated on the original balance. Like I said, compound interest is calculated on the original balance plus the interest that's earned. Okay. And now one more thing about notation, you're going to see a couple examples where we state interest rates. We normally state them per year. And then in line, we actually say per annum because annum is actually line for a year. So to shorten that, instead of saying, this is how much it is per year, per annum, we don't want to have to write that over and over again. So it's abbreviated a lot of times as percent per A, okay? And that's what that means. So if you ever see that, it just means the interest rate for the whole year. Okay. We'll talk about the different types of compounding interest payments, sorry, the compounding periods. We won't get into that yet, but we'll talk about that in the next lesson. So how do you calculate simple interest? So to calculate simple interest, it's actually relatively easy here. All you're really doing is you are calculating the percent of the percent of the principal amount that you earn, and then you have to multiply that by the number of years that you invested in. So normally when we talk about simple interest, we will almost always talk about time in years. Now, I'll be honest, simple interest is not as common in real life. It's not a very common way to calculate interest. But I still discuss it because it is sometimes used in different scenarios. And it's just good for you to kind of see the comparison between simple interest and compound interest. So I'll kind of explain what each of these formulas means. So the interest earned, I just want to make sure you understand this. This is different than the simple interest rate. The interest earned is basically how much do you pay the bank? So, or what you earn. So how much you pay the bank, or how much you earn for investing. Okay, so it's not the total amount that you are getting from the bank. It's just the amount that you have to kind of pay them for doing the investment in the first place. So again, to calculate this is simply take the principal amount. That's how much you deposited. That's your initial deposit or initial amount. Sorry, just should write initial amount or initial deposit. So it's your initial deposit, initial amount. And we multiply that by the interest rate as a percent, really important. So as a percent, remember, your calculator will normally not have a percentage button on there that you can automatically switch to percent. So if you do not have that, you're gonna have to write that out as a decimal. So just keep in mind that you may have to switch this to a decimal, and then you multiply by the time in years, okay? And then if you want to figure out how much money do I have altogether, because when you're done this, you want to figure out, okay, well, how much did I actually earn? Well, all I have to do in this case is actually a pretty easy calculation. I simply take the amount that I deposited, that's my initial amount, plus the interest that was earned. So I hope that kind of makes sense. So to find the total amount is just take the initial amount that I deposited plus the interest that I earned. So again, in simple interest, the interest amount is going to be the same as I already mentioned. So the amount, so just make sure you note the difference here. Big I normally is whenever I use big I, normally referring to the interest earned. And when I refer to the little r, and later on we're going to be looking at little I, I'm referring to the actual percentage, the interest rate there. Okay, so let's look at a couple examples. I feel like it's more clear when you look at an example here. All right, so let's say Weston is investing $500 into an account that pays simple interest 3% per annum. How much money does Weston have in his account after each of the first 3 years of his investment? So let's say that he's doing this for 3 years. So how much money does he have after each of the 3 years? Okay, let's look at the first year. So what we do is we use our formula. Our formula is I is equal to P times R times T. So what is my principal amount? My principal amount in this case is $500, right? My rate, my simple interest rate is 0.03. And again, I have to write that as a decimal because most of your calculators will not have a percentage button, or we could write 3%. But of course, we know that 3% is 0.03, right? Hopefully you remember that from elementary school as well. And then the time that we've invested it in this account, well, it's only been 1 year, right? You've only invested it for 1 year, so the total amount is 1. It's only 1 year there. So we multiply 500 times 0.03 times 1, and that gives me $15. So my total amount, now that I figured out how much interest I've earned, I figure out what the total amount is. And of course, the total amount will be hopefully pretty easy to understand. If Weston put in $500 into his account and then he got paid $15 from the bank, kind of like thank you money, or, basically it's the return he gets for investing his money in the account. he ended up getting $515 at the end of 1 year. It doesn't seem like much because you're looking at that and you're like, well, okay, big whoop de do, $15, right? But remember, that's free $15. Like you didn't really have to do anything. You just have to invest the money. And again, it's better than nothing, right? $15 is still $15. And it's only for 1 year that he invested that in. So let's see what happens if he invests for 2 years. So if he invests for 2 years, we take our principal amount, which is $500. We take our rate, which is 0.03, and we take our time, which is 2 years, and we multiply it together. So we have 500 times 0.03 times 2. We multiply together, we end up getting $30. And that means that the total amount that he has is $500 plus $30, which is $530. So at the end of 2 years, he has $530. So I'm hoping everyone is starting to see what is happening here. What do you notice already? Well, I started off with $500. After 1 year, I have $515. After 2 years, I have $530. This looks like linear growth, right? Because we're increasing by $15 each time. This also, by the way, looks like an arithmetic series, a sequence, sorry, where we just keep adding, we're increasing by 15 each time. So I'm kind of seeing a very similar pattern to what I'm hoping you see the connection between financial math and the units we covered before, right? They're all kind of linking in together now, right? It's very similar to linear growth that you looked at in grade 9 or even all the way up to grade 10 and 11. And then we're seeing that this is very similar to arithmetic sequences. So how much does he have after 3 years? Well, I take my principal amount, which is $500. My interest rate is 0.03, the same as before. So notice that the principal amount is always $500. And obviously the same with the interest rate, right? It's always going to be 0.03. So because that's the interest rate that was given to us in the question. And of course, the time that you invested it in was a total of 3 years. So we multiply 500 times 0.03 times 3, that gives me $45. And that means that total amount after 3 years, Weston has $545 total in the account. So what do we notice in this example? Well, we noticed that in the last example that the total amount in the account, or the balance, that's another way of saying the total amount in the account balance, is increasing by the same amount each year. It's $15, which is basically the interest that is earned. So because the change is constant, and that means that we're increasing by the same amount each time, then then we notice that the total amount in a simple interest account, assuming again that no money is withdrawn, is increasing linearly, right? So basically in a linear account, sorry, in a simple interest account, we notice that the growth is just linear. So we're just increasing by the same amount every single time. So on a graph, this is really what it looks like. So the total amount is obviously going to be higher. So this is with a different example, but you can kind of see it's very similar. For the $3,000, we keep increasing the amount in the account, and of course, the interest that is earned will also keep going up by the same amount because the interest every single year is the same. So it's going to be linear growth all the way throughout. So let's look at another example here. Calculate the total interest earned in an account after 10 years of simple interest at 4% per annum for on a principal amount of $800. What is the balance at the end of those 10 years? So let's take it step by step. Let's figure out the total interest first. So to find the total interest, again, we simply take our formula, which is I is equal to P times R times T. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to replace the principal amount with $800 because that's how much I invested in. That's how much I invested in the account. The interest rate is 0.04. And of course, the time that I invested it in, the number of years I invested it for was 10 years. So I multiply 800 times 0.04 times 10. And by the way, I should put $800 because it's money that we're looking at. And that gives me a total of $320. So that means that I have earned $320 from for investing $800 for 10 years, which is really, really good when you think about that. But I don't want to burst your bubble here, but 4% interest rate doesn't really exist anymore. That's a very high interest rate. It's very unlikely you'll have that, but it does happen every now and then, right? So we can clearly see here that, this is a good investment. You did it for 10 years, and after 10 years, you got $320. That's pretty nice because you didn't really have to do anything for those 10 years, right? Again, this is assuming you didn't take out the money at all, right? With all these questions, we always assume that we put the money in there unless otherwise told, right? So if you want to find the total amount that he has in the account, you simply take the $800 that we deposit into our account and we add $320. And when we add the $320 to $800 that was initially deposited, we get $1,120. So that means that the total balance after 10 years is $1,120. And that is our final answer there. Let's look at another example here. What if you were working backwards to figure out how long it takes for an amount to grow into some goal number that you're looking for? So let's say that you have $5,000 in an account that pays 6% per annum. Again, that's a very high interest rate, but let's just use that for now. And you want to figure out how long it's going to take for you to earn $8,000. So how long do you have to keep the money in the account to earn that amount? So what we're going to do here is we're just going to simply indicate what we already know. Well, we know the balance is, and again, the A is the total balance, like the future amount. I don't want to say that yet because that's something we're going to talk about later, but let's just say that this is our A value, what we are hoping to get. And we know that because this is my A value, but I initially had $5,000 into the account. And again, hopefully you can kind of see this. All I'm doing is I'm basically subtracting these two amounts. And this tells me how much interest I want to earn. So I want to earn a total of $3,000 because if I have $5,000 now and I want to earn $8,000, doing a little bit of math here, you subtract the amounts, you get $30,000. Sorry, $3,000, not $30,000. $3,000. And then, of course, in this case, I know my principal amount is $5,000. My interest rate is 0.06. And I know my interest, the interest that's earned is $3,000. So I can use all this information and sub it into my formula, which is I is equal to P times R times T. And I'm going to solve for T. So I'm going to take $5,000. Sorry, I'm going to take my formula, which is I is equal to P times R times T, and I'm going to replace the interest rate, the interest earned with 3,000. I replace the principal amount with 5,000. I replace the interest rate there with 0.06, and I replace the time there with T. And again, we didn't actually replace it because we don't know what T is. So this question is kind of backwards from the other ones, right? And the other questions were given the principal amount, you're given the time, and you're given the interest rate. Now we're working backwards. You are given the amount, the total, the balance, you're given the principal amount, you're given the interest rate, but you're not given the time. So all we have to do is kind of work backwards here. Well, we know that 5,000 times 0.06 is $300. And of course, 300 T is equal to $3,000. And then what we're doing is simply trying to isolate for T. So we do that by dividing by 300 on both sides. When you divide by 300 on both sides, this ends up giving you T is equal to 3,000 divided by 300, which is 10. So that means it's going to take you 10 years for you to earn $8,000. And you can even verify that the answer is correct. So if I take my I and I simply sub in my P and my R and my T, so we know that the principal amount is $5,000. The interest rate is 0.06, and I multiply by 10. Let's just verify that I get the answer I want. Yes, I definitely do. I get $3,000. And of course, that makes sense because I want $3,000 interest so I can get to the 8,000 that I desire. All right, so that was it for this lesson. Hopefully it wasn't too bad. And I hope that was a good little introduction to this topic. Like I said, we just have a couple homework questions there. Just work away and best of luck.